Hello. Everybody. Welcome to another rendition of Basic Ass Bitches.
Yes.
My name is Kira McCown, and with me, as always, is my not little but younger sister, Sammy Elliott Stevenson.
Whichever last name you want to choose.
But it's up to you. Freedom. That's what we're all about on this show.
For sure.
How you doing?
Great. It is a beautiful Sunday here in Chicago.
Yeah.
It's February 2nd. Oh, happy Groundhog's Day.
Oh my gosh, it is Groundhog Day.
It's Groundhog's Day.
I was so, wrapped up in our show, and then there's some sporting event going on later today.
What's that football thing called?
The Salad Bowl.
The Salad Bowl.
Okay, can't wait.
50 degrees and sunny in Chicago on February 2nd. Wow.
It's magical.
It's magical.
So we're enjoying it inside this studio, making the show for you.
You're welcome.
So today's topic actually is a very, in my opinion, my world of it is like a really loaded topic. Like one in which an hour-long show, which is what we're going to really strive to create for you guys today, is just an hour-long show, would never actually give justice to.
Never.
I ended that sentence with a preposition. I was really trying not to.
Yeah.
But it is specifically about representation and inclusivity, specifically for people of color.
Yes.
We are going to talk a little bit about women too, but women of color even more specifically.
Definitely.
So, we're going to be in that area in our themes and our topics today, and the articles that we're sharing in our discussions tab down below.
Which aren't there yet, so be patient with us. We will
if
get
you're watching
them there.
this live or within 24 hours of it going up, please forgive us. But we'll have them up eventually, and they're amazing reads and really. It really I think they both, the ones that I chose, really create something for the reader, especially white readers, honestly.
Definitely.
So, and one of the reasons I'm really excited about this topic today is because this was actually a topic largely that had me think of doing something like this show, where we get to talk about the things that we're all a little uncomfortable talking about, because so do you remember when I first created my Bitmoji?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And you looked like a basic white bitch?
I was, so I had long hair and, no bangs and a ponytail and an athletic gear, because I wear athletic gear because my job is I'm athletic trainer, you know. And I created my Bitmoji. I was really excited because I'd been seeing all kinds of other people using these Bitmojis. And when I finished creating her, I looked at her and I was like, oh my God, I'm a basic white bitch.
Yeah.
And it was really, I think, my first real realization that that's like who I was.
And who you represent.
And who I represent, exactly. And so it was really interesting to really accept that and say okay, I am a white, heterosexual female in America, and I've always been aware of my level of privilege inside of this persona. I've been aware of it always, and I think that's where my surprise came in, right?
Yeah.
That I was like, oh shit. I'm not supposed to react to things that are going on off air. But
I'm supposed to be waving.
yeah, sorry. Hey, our guest just walked in, so we'll be talking about her in a little bit. But I think it was my very first time, because I've always seen myself as being this
woke bitch,
right?
Yeah.
And so when I saw my Bitmoji, I was like, oh man, I'm totally a basic ass white bitch.
Yeah, definitely.
And so just really taking that on and stepping into that. And then seeing all of the places in my life as an activist and organizer that inside of these conversations that I would feel a little triggered. And, and then seeing oh, that's because I'm the basic white bitch, and that's my role in all of this, you know? And so I've been thinking about this topic quite a bit, honestly, like since that Bitmoji like situation where it's just like, oh wow, I represent this group, and what do I want to put out in the world that does represent this group, which hence we came up with the name of this show being Basic Ass Bitches.
Yeah.
Because that is who we represent. That's largely
who we are.
Who we feel like we represent. So I was really excited to talk about this, and I was really excited about our guest today. Her name is Sameena Mustafa, and we'll be talking with her a little later. But yeah, she and I have had a lot of in-depth conversations, and she's just, she's brought a lot of things to my attention that don't get brought to my attention because of the sphere that I live in. Yeah. So one of the things that I've been really wrestling with, or had been really wrestling with, was this idea of like who is responsible for like the education piece of all of this, right? Yeah. And when I say like that I've been wrestling with it personally, it's just that I've heard a lot of people, like there's a crowd that says like, well, you go and you ask, you get curious, you reach out, and then there's this other.
But then there's the backlash of, it's not my job, not my responsibility.
It's not my responsibility
to educate you. Like you have to go find that information.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there is actually information out there that I wasn't even really aware of until my business partner, who we had on the show the very first week, Carrie Drapak, she basically, we had a meeting and she said, you know what, I think that our company as a whole is just a little too white. And I looked at it and I said, yes, you are right. You're absolutely right about that. And so, we had this conversation about like, well, what does it mean like to be hiring a person of color? Like, what is that? What are the legalities around that? How do you actually like step into being very intentional about like hiring, and it was kind of interesting for us because we started stepping into that sphere. She started doing an online course. And the name of the online course, which I'll find in just a little bit, is on my phone somewhere. But she did an online course about it, just to kind of figure out how we step into that. And strangely enough, we had two different women of color kind of fall into our laps who were great matches for what we were looking for. So in that vein, it was like, wow, that just kind of like appeared to us, and we took on that opportunity, and then there's that conversation also about like, well, what's just checking the boxes and what's actually like the having somebody on your team who is contributing their diversity and their points of view, and you're actually taking that into consideration in a serious way.
Yeah, and that's something that I have experienced myself in my own company in making sure that, because I work in mental health care. And so in Chicago, in mental health care, we definitely want to have diverse representation on our team because a bunch of white therapists aren't going to really contribute to, the mental well-being of all Chicagoans.
I was going to say, in the diversity that Chicago is. Yeah, you can.
Yeah. So inside of that, I've also had that same experience of how do you hire a diverse population without just checking boxes, because one of the articles that we read for today, that'll be in our description, is related to the conversation of pet to threat. And what I read inside of that description of what that is sort of taking diverse populations onto your team for the sake of checking those boxes, like they turn into a pet, like you're so proud to have them, like there's this pride and I've got diversity, look at me. But then when they actually start, presenting ideas and
asking for leadership positions and more
positions,
responsibility and bigger responsibilities.
Then the experience that I was reading about is that they turn into a threat. Like they get hushed. They actually get fewer responsibilities and fewer leads. And I imagine that the reason that happens is because it's literally threatening to the privilege that the majority experiences. I mean, if that conversation shifts, then we don't get as many leadership positions, and the system doesn't continue to exist in a way that benefits us. And so that pet to threat conversation of like, I'm going to check some boxes, but then not actually promote my people into higher positions. So yeah, there's definitely a constant awareness and education that has to be had, for the sake of our responsibility as humans, as Americans, as community.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so one of the resources that I found, the 2 articles that I sent you, was found through this website that Sameena actually introduced me to, called Race Conscious Dialogues. And they're actually out of Oak Park, which is pretty cool. And they have sessions for educating white people on race relations, how to talk about racism, and how to really be in a real way, be an ally. And right now, after the readings I did, I was like, is ally the right word? Is it? Because now I understand that there's a total stigma behind it and all of that. But I think it's important to have those conversations and talk freely about them, as long as we're open to actually learning, which was one of the articles that I mentioned that I texted you, is written by a Black woman who talks about how she had really given up on talking to white people about how to talk about racism and what racism really is. And mostly because what she experienced, even through a family member, she talks about having a white aunt, right? That she wanted to have these conversations with, but every time she would have these conversations, there was a trigger, situation, right? Her aunt was from New York and was liberal and,
Well, I'm not a racist.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what she talked about, that there was this shutdown that her aunt would always exhibit once these conversations got real, right? Yeah. And that was, what this author talked about is basically that there's a shutdown among white people when this topic comes up. And that shutdown has caused a lot of people of color to just kind of want to throw their hands up in the air and just be like, oh my God, fuck it. If your feelings are more important than actually talking about this racism issue that we have in the country, and that your very privilege is present always for me, but so unpresent for you.
Right.
It's,
well, I mean, when people of color are getting, passionate about these conversations, especially amongst Black populations, what they get told is that, they're just an angry Black person, and I hear that frequently, inside of the therapeutic setting, especially, is that that's how they're experienced when they're passionate about anything, whether it be at work or with friends. They're shut down. Don't be that angry Black person.
And I kind of because my voice gets really, really loud.
You are perceived as an angry person.
You need to stop. You do need to calm down. I'm like, no, I'm fine.
It doesn't necessarily mean you're angry. And if you are angry, good, you should be.
I got a lot of shit to be angry about, man. Right? And so I think that there is something for us as white people to take responsibility for, which is our own feelings. And I think that there's a way to take responsibility for that trigger and also be okay with the fact that you're triggered.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay to be uncomfortable in these conversations. They're uncomfortable conversations for everyone. I mean, this is such an ever-present thing for, people who are not white. And it should be more of a present topic for people who are white, and if you have to deal with your discomfort around it, then good, because everyone else is. So deal with it.
Yeah, a lot of other people are. And the other piece of that really is just being open to our own lack of self-awareness in that realm, just because I've become very aware of a lot of the privilege that I've had growing up. I mean, how the amount of times I got in trouble, and you too.
Oh yeah,
I
mean, I was arrested twice in high school. There is no way that there is no way that if I weren't white getting arrested twice in high school that I would have gone to college right out of high school, that I would have then gone to grad school right out of college, that I would have then opened my own business with a criminal record.
Yeah, it's my arrests too that has me fully aware of the level of privilege that has been presented to me. And so just being aware of that and being open to conversation about it, and then also educating everybody around you. I know I'm definitely not perfect in this area. I've had many questions about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, as far as correcting people. I have a hard enough time correcting people how to say my name, let alone that they shouldn't be saying certain words in their own home, And I've been faced with those situations, and I don't know that I've always had the best answer for them. But this is how we open that dialogue.
Yeah, definitely.
Some of the other stuff I wanted to touch on before we bring Sameena on is some of the numbers that you crunched this morning, Samantha, for the show today, just to get a full understanding. One of the articles that you kind of sent me about an hour or so before the show was something about Pete Buttigieg being a lying motherfucker. Yeah. And of course, I had to read that article. And what's interesting is it talks about his Ivy League education and how much privilege he does have. And because of that education, right, he's not fooling anybody, right, that he's not aware of some of the things that we're going to be talking about here, the numbers and how this stuff actually really breaks down and what the deal really is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's very widely misperceived. I suppose there's
misperceived a word?
I don't know.
Oh.
Misconceived.
It is now.
It's misconceived. That you hear this statement all the time that you just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, how old is that saying?
We grew up with that saying, absolutely.
Definitely. But when you actually look at the way that the system we live in works, that just isn't workable. I mean, what was stated in that article that I sent you was that Pete Buttigieg didn't have to cross a massive ditch to get to school, and what things that we don't pay attention to are that majorly minority schools in the United States receive $23 billion less in funding than majority white schools in the United States. So it's even if you're living in a poorer white neighborhood, you're likely better off than a poorer minority neighborhood. And so it's not only are you better off in funding, but you're also better off in what we've talked about as the benefit of the doubt. People look at us as white people, and even though we have an arrest history, nobody's going to assume that. And so we have that benefit of the doubt that not only do we have more funding within the system, but we also are seen and perceived as educated, as well-to-do, as generally good people, even if that's not the case. And so we're being lifted up in society where minority populations are not. And so we do have that privilege.
Absolutely. There's even the privilege, one of the things that I saw early on was just even the privilege of networks. Not to put him on blast or anything, but our brother doesn't really take on the notion of blending populations, and I think it's really personally important because, first of all, the amount of culture and education there is inside of being around people that are not like us is incredible. But also just the fact that like our networks, because America was built on slavery and racism and all of these other things, like we've automatically got this one up, right? And these networks that have already been built over generations of whiteness. And so now like it's really shitty for us to say, no, we'll go this way. You guys can have your own culture over here. And I think that networking has always been something in my mind, even as a really young woman, that was important. It's the reason I went to a private university. I said, I can't go to University of Iowa where all my high school friends went, because then I'm just gonna be with all of my high school friends. And I know that. I need to like get into a different network of people. And I think that there is this, I think that's something that's really missing when we have these conversations as well, is just that like there's so much missing when we're apart from each other. And really what it does is it just drives down like, everybody. Like,
Well, and it's well demonstrated in how our news and politics goes. So things that I looked up are percentages, because when we compare the percentages, it's very clear that the people representing our news and creating our policies are not representing the United States.
For sure. Okay,
Very
well,
clear.
what are these numbers?
Okay, so in the United States, the percentage of people of color in the United States is 37.4%. So 37.4% of the population is non-white.
Okay.
And in the television news, it's 25% are non-white. In radio news, it's 9%.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess when there's no face to it, then you get to do whatever you want, right?
Well, yeah, I guess that's an interesting point. That's really surprising. Okay.
Yeah. As far as news directors, 17%. So the people who are actually directing the news are half of, in relation, half
to the actual population.
To the actual population.
Yep.
And then population of people of color in the United States has increased 12.4% since 1995, but in the news media has only increased 9.5%. So it's not even increasing at the rate that the United States is becoming more diverse. In politics, okay, so news is bad. So what that means for the news media is that, when we represent stories that are happening, you can see it in the subtleties of the language. When a black person shoots someone, they're a murderer. They're a killer.
They're a killer.
They're a killer.
Yeah.
When a white person shoots someone, they're mentally ill.
Or they're a shooter.
Yeah, which is totally takes out it removes the impact, the severity of that crime, and subdues it into something that is,
Yeah, and then a Muslim is a terrorist.
And a Muslim is a terrorist.
That one.
Yeah. So you can see just in the language that represents these stories that, it's white people representing these stories. And it's not, it may be intentional.
In a smoky room somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, wow,
yeah, exactly.
Screw over all these people.
And more than likely, it's just because nobody's paying attention. Like, not realizing outside of yourself that you do have this privilege and that the language does matter. And how you're representing people in the news media, it changes the perceptions of the entire country. Everyone who's watching or listening to your news is internalizing what you're saying, whether it be that black people are internalizing that they're dangerous and that there's something wrong with them, or it's white people internalizing that, black people are dangerous, or people of color, or that Hispanic people, Mexicans specifically, are rapists and
lazy
thieves and lazy, which is not accurate.
At the same time, they're taking all of our jobs.
Yeah, they're taking all of our jobs also. They're lazy and they're taking all of our jobs.
There's a lot of like this one foot.
Ridiculous.
1 foot in each camp over here.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah.
Yeah. So, and then when we look at the politics, okay, so let's see. Did you know that only 6% of Trump's cabinet is black?
Not surprised.
Not surprised. Which is the lowest in the past few
Ever?
presidencies.
Not ever.
I mean, Reagan had 7%.
Well, and then you get earlier.
Yeah,
when black
earlier.
people have
Earlier is
representation
less and less.
whatsoever,
But in the Clinton administration, it was 27%.
Okay.
Obama had. Bush, I think, also had 6%. Obama had
Really?
25%. And then Trump goes back
Bush
down to 6%.
wasn't even trying.
Nope.
Jeez Louise.
Nope, not trying.
Okay.
So then, we have 3 black senators
Okay.
out of 100. So
Wow.
that's 3%. When the representation of non-Hispanic black people in the United States is 12.7%. Multicultural black people in the United States are 14%.
Oh, wow.
And we have 3 senators
Wow. I was
to
not aware of
represent.
that. I was not aware of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
to represent that population. So, 47 Hispanic Congress members. That's 10.8%. Hispanic people make up 17.8% of the U.S. 4 Hispanic senators. So 4% of our Senate is representing 17.8% of our population.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
There are 91 non-Hispanic white senators. 91% of our senators are non-Hispanic white people.
I actually had no clue the Senate was that white.
Yeah. And non-Hispanic white people in the United States make up 62.6%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have some work to do.
We got some work to do, right?
Definitely. And this is, and I think this is, a part of the conversation we're going to be coming up on, right? Which is like, how do we, as a collective and as an individual, really responsibly push for more diversity in our elected offices, in our leadership, in our media, and not in this like checking of boxes kind of a way, but in a for realsies way.
In a for realsies way, yeah. Now the House does a little bit better. But I still have some issues. So 52 House representatives are black. That is out of 435. So that's about 12%, a little less than 12%, 11.95 to be specific.
Okay. Get down to the specifics here.
Down to the specifics.
I know you got your Texas instrument out for this.
I definitely did. Well, I mean, my phone calculator, but I did actually have to calculate the numbers. I had to. Nowhere does it say this is how many white people are in the Senate or in the House. I had to actually pull the numbers from specifically black, specifically Asian, Native American, Hispanic House representatives, and then subtract from the total and do the calculations myself.
Look at you.
I was surprised that wasn't just easily accessible.
She works hard for her money, folks.
Something like that. So the non-Hispanic white people in the House make up 73.3%, which is closer to that 62.6%, but still definitely siding toward, white legislation.
Yeah.
Definitely. Something I thought you would enjoy hearing was that there are 127 women in Congress out of 435. That's 29.2%.
Yeah.
Of our Congress that is
I'm aware. Yep,
female.
Yep. Bastards.
Even though we make up 50% of the population?
Yeah, we're coming.
We're coming for you.
Don't you worry.
Yeah, so I mean, those are just some of the numbers I pulled, but it's so demonstrative of how really privileged we white people are here in the United States when our news media is slanted for us, our policymakers are slanted for us. Our presidential cabinet is slanted.
Our textbooks are slanted for us.
Our history.
All of it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Representing us more than really the population actually calls for.
Yeah. And so, I think that once you consume this kind of those numbers and understand, where the disparity is coming from, there's an opportunity here to really step back and ask ourselves, like, what are we doing to make this better? Are we interested in making it better? Because I think there's also a real danger in saying, like, no, I'm like a liberal. I'm not racist. I'm not sexist.
If you're someone who is saying I'm not racist, then just take a deeper look because you are. I mean,
because you
are.
Way to lay it on her gently.
I know, right? Well, we all are, right? We grew up in America. If you grew up in America, then through generations of inherited conversations, you are. And even if you're making an active attempt to educate yourself and have conversations and learn, like, that's awesome. And that doesn't mean that you're not racist. I mean, it doesn't mean that you don't have prejudice. You have prejudice. And looking at it is a great step. And it doesn't free you of it completely. You have to constantly be educating yourself. You have to constantly be having conversations, constantly be listening. Listening is definitely the number one, the number one rule to being an ally. Listen. Yep. Shut up and listen.
Awesome. Well, and I think this is a great segue into introducing our guest. Our guest, her name is Sameena Mustafa, and I actually got to meet Sameena because she was doing a congressional run back in 2017 to 2018, and I was working on a organization called Warriors for the Matriarchy. You can still actually find us on Facebook. I keep gaining more and more likes for it, and
nice.
And I don't know why. So, but I was doing this project where I wanted to phone bank for women who are running for congressional office, and someone clued me into Sameena, and she was running in the 5th congressional district in Chicago, where I own a business, and I got to get to know her, and she's really incredible, and she has so much to say, and she's actually starting her own webcast called Hand Her the Mic. And she is going to be the host of it. And so welcome, Sameena. Thank you so much.
Thanks
for
having me.
coming and chatting with us on Basic Ass Pitches.
Babs, as we affectionately call it.
Yes, Babs.
I do like the acronym. So, Sameena, I want you to just tell our audience a little bit about yourself to start. How did you even get involved in politics? How did you get involved in all of these very big projects that you've taken on?
Yeah, it's funny because I've been thinking a lot about that, how to sort of synthesize why I'm here in this moment, in this historical moment. And I feel like in some ways I don't think I could have avoided it. I was thinking I just want to point out some historical markers where we're at. It's February 2nd. It's Groundhog Day, which I think is an apt metaphor for what it's like to be a person of color in this country. But it's also the second day of Black History Month. On Friday, Trump announced an expansion of the Muslim ban. We're in the midst of a presidential primary. If you don't know that, I'm so sorry. Or maybe you're better off.
I was gonna say,
maybe you're better off.
Sorry for those folks.
But it is the conversation about race is one that I have dealt with my entire life. I remember some of my earliest memories of sort of the news. I'm a little bit older than the folks on the panel here, so I remember the Iran hostage crisis and how that was the first time I really got to see Muslims as cast as the enemy. And so there's been very little time in my life where somehow my identity was not either scary, controversial, or and ultimately a matter of policy. Mm-hmm. So I feel like every person who is marginalized has to confront politics or be part of it, whether they want to or not, because someone is legislating your existence regardless. So where I found myself in the fall of 2017 running for Congress, how I got there is there's a lot of different ways, but I'll give you the short answer, which is about 6 months before the November 2016 election. I've been tracking I'm an avid reader of news, and at the time was working in business and commercial real estate, and also hosting comedy shows, which might just seem like, oh, you're just a comic. What do you know about politics? our show, Simmer Brown, was very deliberately political. And we were also very clear, we're going to have everyone on, white, black, brown, LGBTQ, we had Native American folks. Everybody was going to be on our show at some point. Now, we weren't going to have somebody who was going to wear a Confederate flag, but we were very deliberate about who we curated to be in our space. And I remember performing a few months before the election to a liberal feminist crowd. And I made a joke about Islamophobia, and there was this sort of awkward laughter. And I'll never forget that moment. It was like that moment where it was what I call indignant indifference, which is, I know I'm offended, but I'm not going to do anything about it. And that, to me, really synthesizes, unfortunately, a lot of what I experience on the left in terms of the political organizing. You can say, oh, I can't even tell you how many times a person, whether it's a member of Indivisible or DSA or whatever group, says, oh, but so-and-so candidate is so great for people of color. And they're literally yelling this at me, either in my face or on social media. And I'm thinking, somehow I don't believe you because if you're part of that movement, I don't trust you. At the end of the day, when it comes to making a decision about dollars and cents, what are you going to cut first? Is it going to be something that helps you or something that helps people like me? And so that's where I felt like it was really imperative to be part of that conversation, even if it was, some people, there was a woman who actually described her own congressional run as she was just doing it and not, she sort of like knew all the odds were against her, and she was like, I just did it anyway. But I'm like, no. I know there are people who hear my message and it resonates for them, whether they look like me or not. And let's be clear, my district, the 5th Congressional District, is over 80% white. That's not an accident. In the city of Chicago, which is 2/3 black and brown,
wow,
you had to do a lot of gerrymandering
absolutely.
to get an 82. I mean, obviously it covers parts of the suburbs, but if you look at the suburbs and even it goes from Cook to DuPage, what kind of tortured map making you had to do to get an over 80% white district in the city of Chicago.
Right.
But again, it's all related, and I know this is a conversation that could really be very expansive, but if you want to drill down to political representation, you can't also separate it from the other sort of mechanisms in our society. If you don't have people of color who are in management at a corporation or in leadership at an organization, frankly, they just have less money. They just have less money. So who is going to be seeding being those grassroots donors for some of those candidates? I raised a little bit over $130,000. And just there's a lot of different numbers I looked at, but let's just say roughly, at a minimum, I was outspent 10 to 1.
I was going to say, I was like, wow, yeah, you were definitely outspent. And I believe that you came in with 27% of the vote, isn't that?
It was a little bit over 25%.
Okay.
But again, to get 1 out of 4 votes with less than, not even 10% of the money, that just speaks to, one, the amazing folks like you who took the time and made phone calls to voters. And I remember the day we were literally walking around. It was a freezing cold December day. And there was one other volunteer who showed up, and we were walking around Wicker Park and knocking on doors. And that's what it takes. It's person-to-person conversation. But again, I think there was an article that I shared with you that there's a book coming out, Politics is for Power, and it's very clear that people think that politics can be a hobby, that it's something that is interesting at cocktail parties and that makes you look woke and like you're one of the good ones. But at the end of the day, it's not your life on the line.
Right.
It's not, and I will say this as someone who has education privilege, class privilege. I am not in any immediate danger right now, unless there's something under this desk that I don't know about. But
I checked before we started.
So I am clear that I am in a position of safety, relative safety. But I also know that can change at any moment. And also, in my position of relative safety, it is my obligation to then speak up and say, we have to not only speak out about these things, but we have to be unified and have a coalition. So like one of the examples is on my podcast, which I have been broadcasting now for about 2 months, is I've had women who, a woman who started the New Georgia Project with Stacey Abrams and Sayofat, who's based in Atlanta. And I think anyone who follows politics knows what happened in Georgia in 2018. There was Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State, stole the election to become governor of Georgia. And Stacey Abrams has started New Georgia Project to help folks register to vote, give them access to the ballot. And so we're faced with really people are sort of saying RIP democracy, but for some people, it never showed up. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we need to really say, how do we, even in the North, even in so-called blue bubbles, how do we really address these on a policy level and implement that policy? Because we're not going to overcome it, even probably in our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be a constant battle. And I have to say, tomorrow's the Iowa caucus. Iowa's 91% white. Mm-hmm. I think I've got some Iowa natives on this panel.
Right here.
Yeah. So, but I mean, let's be
Iowa
clear.
Represent.
Yeah, Julian Castro brought up the fact that why is Iowa the first in the nation? Mm-hmm. Why is a state that doesn't reflect our party making the decisions for a party that's supposed to be, using phrases like unity? The diversity is our strength, and there's unity, in our diversity. And Nancy Pelosi says those things all the time. But it's like, show us. Mm-hmm. And the number that I know, Sammy, you went through a couple of statistics. 8.8% of Congress is women of color. But think about the couple of women of color who've showed up in the 2018 cycle. Mm-hmm. I'd say their impact has been outsized. Mm-hmm. So we know the impact that a few have just on the national conversation, shifting the conversation, even on issues that are universal, like Medicare for all. Mm-hmm. What if there were more? And I think there's an answer sort of in my question, which is there are people who don't want that because they know how powerful it is and they want to shut it down. And some of them say they're on our side. Mm-hmm. So I'm very clear-eyed about the opportunity, but I'm also very clear-eyed about the challenges.
Yeah, and what it's really going to take. And I think that that's what causes a lot of apathy in today's hobbyism versus actual activism and organizing, right? Is this idea that this is not only a lifetime commitment, but it is a generational commitment. Generation after generation is going to be working on this, and we're probably not going to see the results we want to be seeing within our lifetime. But and I think that can be discouraging, and I think that having these conversations and really letting people know there are steps to take, and it's going to take a lot. I mean, just for example, I don't know the numbers, and I should have looked this up, but like how many women even ran in the 2017, 2018
about
elections?
500 for Congress. I don't know.
Congress.
I don't know the numbers overall, but again, to your point, sort of, and I had this conversation with a political scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She studies people of color and women and running for office, Dr. Paru Shah, and she said, the last year of the woman was 1992, which, I'm going to guess there's people watching this who weren't even born then, right? So,
sure.
They didn't see Carol Moseley Braun become the first black woman ever to be in Congress, and as Joe Biden famously forgot, there's only been one other, and that's Kamala Harris. So we have a lot to do, but even still, and the other book I want to amplify here is I just read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, and it's a really powerful book. He really weaves his own story and his own journey of anti-racism, and he's a black man, and he acknowledges there are some black folks and brown folks and Native American. There are folks who are amplifying and enabling white supremacy. So we can't let them off the hook, because if they're in a policy-making role, they have the power to do something anti-racist, to shift it. But it just, that conversation, now I'm noticing all these people in their Twitter bios, anti-racist. It's become, it's just like a label. It's like a clothing item.
For sure. Absolutely. And people cloak themselves in it, and it tends to work.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. It allows people to like blind themselves to the inherent racism and sexism that we all walk around with. I mean, I even during the presidential primaries had to like take a step back and like look at my own misogyny. And it's like, do I have these opinions because of the misogyny that is like laced into our culture?
Yeah, and I mean, something interesting that you brought up, 91% of Iowans being white. And the majority of the non-white Iowans living actually in the city that Kira and I grew up in.
That's right. I was going to bring that up. I was like, and we lived in the most black city. And we have was it 3/4 of all black people in Davenport, Iowa, which is where we grew up.
Yeah, so that means that so much of Iowa is just 100% white.
Yeah.
And I was looking at numbers of the most densely populated black cities in America. And, when you're looking at like 13% of America is black. And, but Detroit has like 85% black population. And then New Orleans and Birmingham. And, it's so concentrated. And so many people think that just because, Jim Crow ended in 1965, that segregation is, no longer an issue. But it is. It's an issue. Like you were saying, the gerrymandering has, a district being 80% white. And that's a problem. There's no representation for that. And people live their lives as if, this issue doesn't exist because it's not in their face every day. And so they're just completely unaware of it. And I mean, being that segregation only ended, 55 years ago? Like, that's so recent. That's such a recent history.
Absolutely.
And I would argue that it never ended. Because since then you've had, in the last, 50, 60, 70 years, you've had redlining and the impact of redlining.
Yeah.
So there's a really interesting, since we're in Chicago, I want to amplify a project that has been done by a photographer and activist, Tanika Lewis-Johnson. It's called the Folded Map Project, where she took the address of someone on the north side, so 6600 north, and went 6600 south, and talked to the person.
That's right. You told me about that.
And talked to the person who lived in that house, and the person who lived in, and brought them together in a video. And in some cases, sadly, there's someone who lives in that home and on the north side, and then the home on the the sort of the twin is abandoned, is vacant. And so she's expanding, and she's doing one for the west side. And I just think sometimes numbers are powerful. Some people are moved by statistics. Some people are moved by stories. Some people are never moved.
Some people are never moved.
But I think that was an interesting way of using art and mapping for good, and really illustrating this is the reality of what's on the ground. I mean, I don't think there's anybody on this panel who's a fan of Rahm Emanuel, but he closed mental health clinics, he closed schools, things that are critical for wellness and education. And we sort of look at it, and we're not going to see really the effects of that probably for 50 to 100 years.
Yeah.
And so not only is the work that we have to think about and frame is generational, the harm is going to be generational. So it has to be an ongoing conversation, because there's somebody who is now walking that much further, or possibly going, to having to make the expense to go to a private school or a charter school, and all of the things that come with that. And so, again, I don't like. I know these conversations are important, and I do want people to think, yes, there's something I can do, because I do know at the end of the day, sometimes telling someone, hey, just do this one thing today.
Yeah.
Do this thing today, or read this book, and not because I feel like if you say if you have these sort of universalizing statements and say everything is bad, then people do have this reaction like, there's nothing I can do.
Well, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So Sameena, can you share with our audience a bit about like what do you say go out and do? What are the steps that people can take in their day-to-day life or in their involvement that would really make a difference?
So I have done a couple of things. So I'll just give what I've done as examples. And again, not everyone's going to be able to do it. And it's not going to be easy. But the book I mentioned earlier, Dr. Kendi's book, I saw the book. I got to actually meet the author. He was doing a book tour. And some friends that had already been talking about it. So I read the book and I decided I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters of Chicago, which is actually turning 100 this year. And it's an important organization for voter education and engagement, but it also has its history with racism and white supremacy. The founder, Carrie Chapman Catt, famously said, "White supremacy shall be strengthened, not weakened by women's suffrage." So there's a history in the organization that is troubling, to say the least. But within that, I think, because of that history, it's important to bring some corrective or some take some action to not just be sort of resigned by that. So I suggested to a committee that I started, which is the Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, let's have a book discussion about this book. Let's bring it to the league. Now, it's interesting, I'm not like, I have to go back and look. I don't know how many members actually showed up, but it actually introduced our organization to people who don't normally think of us. Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of one of those things where it's sort of a push and a pull, where I'm probably making my fellow league members uncomfortable, but I'm probably creating a space for people who want to have that conversation. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy. We had, I don't know, somewhere around 70 people who said they wanted to be part of this conversation, and about 15 showed up.
Oh, wow.
So let's be clear. It's going to be a lot of effort, and every time isn't going to be hitting it out of the park. That being said, the summer before, I did a showing of a film where a white Southern woman who's a journalist did a documentary tracing her family's history of slavery. And we did it at the Chicago Theological Seminary. We partnered, the league partnered with them. We had, probably 150, 200 folks who showed up to that showing. So it's like, sometimes you get a win. Mm-hmm. so you know it's going to be, you know this.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. It's just like knocking doors, making phone calls. Sometimes someone's going to slam the door in your face. Sometimes they're going to hang up the phone.
Sometimes they'll threaten to sick their dog on you, but it's one out of like
baby steps.
100.
But again, to me, the take-home message is consistency. Mm-hmm. What are you doing consistently? Doing it once is not going to have as big an impact. It is something. So I don't want to dismiss the folks who have done something big, but I also want you to understand, how did you create that one space? Mm-hmm. And how do you learn the lessons of creating that one space and replicate it and have it be a cumulative, sort of iterative process where you're expanding the conversation and bringing folks in. The one thing that I'm literally having this conversation with folks on anti-racism, on healthcare, on immigration, even folks who I think are really thinking of everyone. I was actually on a committee to do a rally last summer, and they had a really powerful mission statement. Mm-hmm. Abolition of ICE, ending detention, decriminalizing immigration. And nowhere in the document did they say anything about religion. And they said, oh, we can put Muslim in. I said, no. You're not going to put Muslim in, because I want it to be very clear that it could be anyone who is even racialized because they're assumed to be Muslim. So let's just make it religion. But again, even in that space, I was the only person who said it. So is it exhausting? Yes, it's exhausting.
To be short, yes, it is. Yep.
But it's also showing up and being willing to be uncomfortable. And that is... I'll bring it back to my run. I actually really struggled with, should I run? Should I be the person who sort of throws myself literally and figuratively on the grenade of American politics? But I chose to do it. And I think there were literally hundreds of other women and people of color who decided to do the same thing. And so...
Yeah, I think that even like Time Magazine and People Magazine were all doing reports and stories I think we remember from the time saying like, if I remember correctly, I thought it was like thousands,
Right.
of women running for elected office, and to see the impact like you point to. I mean, I didn't even really think of that correlation. Like, look at the women of color who have made it into the Congress and what a massive impact they're making.
Yeah. Which is why I'm gonna, for the Star Wars nerds out there, I feel like we're sort of in the middle of the episodes 4 through 6. I think we're 2018 was kind of like Star Wars, and a couple broke through, and then we're in the middle of Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the next cycle is going to be Return of the Jedi, but I'm pretty sure the Empire is striking back real hard. So I'm just. It's not a perfect analogy, but it just makes me. My husband's a huge Star Wars. We have literally every single version of Star Wars there ever could be. So it's part of my life. So
I was a little surprised when you started coming up with the Star Wars analogy.
I know.
Wow.
We could have a whole show about the diversity issue in Star Wars and what happened to Rose Tico, but that's another show. And I know
amazing.
just that comment alone is going to trigger a whole bunch of folks commenting on your.
We'll have to hashtag it then.
Hashtag Rose Tico, Kelly Marie Tran. But I mean, that's but it shows up in everything. Whether it's, the Oscars are a week from today.
Oh, yeah.
And so that hashtag, April Rain did Oscar So White. So, it's sort of like we made some progress and then we went backwards. And there's lots of reasons why. But if we're sticking to the political realm, let's be clear that the political parties as they're constructed, the funding of campaigns, the cost of campaigns, all of these things, and how campaigns are covered, contribute to that. It's all part of the ecosystem. And so if you write a letter, if somebody is covering a story and you write a letter to a reporter and it gets published, that's just one more person who is saying, no, this isn't acceptable. And it's going to be seen by more than just
that's great.
your friends and the people that you talk to. So there's ways to do that. And you don't all have to read a book and create a book discussion and be on the board of a 100-year-old organization. I wrote just in the last couple of weeks, I just had an op-ed published on the Hindutva movement which is a Hindu fascism movement in India. So again, this is a global phenomenon. And while it's scary today, there was a time when people felt the same sort of resignation, but they didn't give up.
Absolutely. And I think that those of us who do get involved, just, understanding that the wins don't always come, and when they do, it feels really, really, really good.
And you have to celebrate them.
Yeah,
you really
absolutely.
do. Celebrate the wins. I think there are folks who, yes, we've had some wins say, let's peel back things like reproductive rights. We've had a lot of losses throughout the country. We've had a couple of wins here in Illinois, and we started to become a kind of a haven for folks who are seeking abortion services. But let's be clear, why are some of the other states and clinics and whatever under assault, essentially, the folks who are seeking abortion services? And so there's a lot to unpack there, but I think there's, again, an opportunity to think okay, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There have been women of color, in this case as well, who have been sort of laying the groundwork and doing the work to make sure women in states like Alabama will get services, because I think there's only one clinic in the entire state.
Goodness.
So, when Planned Parenthood comes around and says we're gonna protect choice in Alabama, it's like they will probably raise more money than the clinic there, or the Yellowhammer Fund, which is an abortion fund that serves women in Alabama. But they have a bigger megaphone. They have more folks who know who they are.
Yes.
And so that it shows up even in places where you would think it wouldn't show up. And so that's, if you have an issue area that you care about, there is a way to sort of do a deep dive and try to impact that space. You don't have to do it all.
Right.
And I don't. I pick a couple of areas and I'm like, okay, that's where I'm going to focus.
And I think that's a great piece of advice. I've done a couple of activism talks where I try to get people involved in doing something, and it's just a matter of honing in on what it is you really like, what keeps you up at night, what really gets you, and focusing in on that, and also understanding that like there are others of us out there working on our own respective passions. One of the organizations that I've been involved with here in Chicago, the People's Lobby, really helped me to understand that in a big way. That it's like, there are and mostly because there are all these different subgroups inside of the organization. It's like we work on, liberation and the prison industrial complex, and over here we work on, funding campaigns, and so it's kind of nice to know that those other groups within this organization are all working on something that I also care very much about, but I get to put my focus into what it is that, like I said, keeps me up at night.
Yeah, so we also have to trust that there are other people who are working on what they're passionate about and what keeps them up at night, doing the work to support all of us.
And that's another conversation altogether.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, and there are so many questions I had in my mind that I was going to ask you, and
we
it
have
is
to be
12:04.
responsible for
Oh,
time.
wow. Responsible for time.
I know, it
That
could
I was
be
like,
so
there's this
fast.
other question I have for her, and I'm not going to ask it now. We're just going to ask you on as a guest once again, another time, because
thanks for having me.
Yeah, because there's all like you said, there's so much to unpack in this, and we're always educating ourselves. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you
So
so
you
much
guys,
for being here.
hand her the mic. Tune in. That's on YouTube. Is that
So
correct? How do they find that?
Yeah, we're on iTunes, and we have some content on YouTube. We're working out the kinks.
Okay.
White supremacy. What am I saying? the YouTube, Google, supremacy of it all. But yeah, we are going to be taping right here in the studio, and but appreciate you amplifying our voices.
Yeah, our pleasure. Awesome, you guys. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Yeah, at
For
11 a.m. Central.
Yep, for Babs.
Thanks,
Thanks, y'all.